Hi, I'm Dempsey Pulot, and this week I'm reviewing. Now before we start off, as always, I just want to take a quick second to remind you guys to make sure you hit that like button if you like today's video, and if you're new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button as well for new content like this weekly. But without further ado, let's jump into today's subject, which isn't a movie at all, like I normally do, but instead it's the TV series Dave. Dave is a semi-autobiographical series which documents Dave Bird, aka Little Dicky's, rise to fame and his many misadventures along the way. Dicky, which is what I'll be referring to him as for the duration of this video, stars in the show, and he's joined by some people that you might recognize. Andrew Santino is probably the most recognizable. Personally, I've been a fan of his for a very long time. He starred in the Showtime show that was produced by Jim Carrey, I'm Dying Up Here, which is totally underrated if you haven't seen it. I believe it was canceled, but it shouldn't have been, especially so soon. He also almost starred in the How I Met Your Mother spinoff, How I Met Your Dad. That is before it was also canceled, but it didn't even make it to air before it was canceled. Yeah, it was one of those failed pilots. Christine Koh, who you guys might remember, was in the beautiful Netflix film that I also reviewed a couple of weeks back. If you haven't seen that yet, I'll put the link in the description box below. She stars in this as well, and the two of them play a couple of Dicky's friends who he later commissions to be his manager and designer, respectively. Travis Bennett from the hip-hop entourage Odd Future also appears on the show. He plays Dicky's best friend and producer, Els. But totally new to the scene are two actors, Taylor Misiak, who plays Dicky's girlfriend, Allie, and Gata, who plays his hype man on the show, named Gata. Yeah, like Little Dicky, he's also playing himself on the show, and honestly, he just so happened to be my favorite character throughout this entire season and series so far, just because he has one of these surprisingly emotional arcs. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say. And if you've seen the show, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you're wondering why I've spent so much time talking about these characters, it's not just because they play off of each other so well, and also not because they're so integral in his life, but because, yes, the show is called Dave, it's about Little Dicky, but each of them play a pretty big part in his story. Now, before I continue, I do just want to address the elephant in the room, and that is the fact that this show will absolutely be compared to Atlanta if it hasn't been compared to it already. But it's not without good reason. I mean, the two are kind of similar in ways. You see, I'm already comparing them myself. They both do and don't have a straight story structure. Things do get very weird very quickly on both shows. But if I'm being totally honest here, Donald Glover crawled so that Dicky could fly with this thing. At the same time, though, I think that Dicky's brand and his perspective and approach to the taboo are really helpful in distinguishing the show from Atlanta. At the end of the day, both shows are really good, but for totally different reasons. The pilot is very earnest and does a nice job setting up the tone of the show, and when we first meet Dicky, he's actually trying to forge some connections within the rap community. Some of the following episodes focus more on his personal relationships and even some of the awkward situations that he's put in as a result of his ambition. And while they're not the strongest episodes, they still contain a lot of humor. That's what I really liked about this show, the fact that it never lets up. It's consistently funny, even though it's not the most consistent. Even in the season finale, the season finale, a third of it is taken up by this hip-hop opera about what it's like to be in jail. That literally comes from nowhere, and because it comes from nowhere, it is absolutely hilarious. Of course, along with the subject material itself. Dicky, who wrote a lot of the episodes and I'm sure had tons of creative input on all the others, does a fantastic job. He is surprisingly funny. I honestly thought that Little Dicky was just a persona before this, but no. It's absolutely just him, and some of his humor is truly brilliant. I also really enjoyed the continuity and the way that some of the humor really snowballs. And the best thing that I could compare it to is Curb Your Enthusiasm. Even though it's not as great as Curb Your Enthusiasm, he's really acting on like a Larry David level, where something that happens early on that seems random doesn't really make sense until the very final shot or sequence, or even for a few episodes down the line. Because don't get me wrong, not every final note is a punchline on this show. As mentioned before, the show is really slow to start, and it doesn't really start to pick up until about the halfway point, in my opinion, starting particularly with an episode that honestly switches up the entire format of the show and features Gaeta as the star, literally. The entire episode is about him, and in addition to shining a light on his persona and a little bit of his history, it also has an interesting spotlight on mental health. And given everything that I saw prior to this episode, every episode that I saw prior to this episode, I was not expecting that. And it did come from left field, and it was a total risk, but it absolutely worked. And yeah, for those of you guys who saw the episode, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. But that is the point in the show where I realized just how serious it was starting to take itself. And it also is interesting because it's at that point in the series that you realize that Dicky's career is also starting to become a lot more serious, and he's starting to take it a lot more serious. Before he knows it, he's booking gigs and he's meeting all these really big celebrities. And by the way, all the celebrity cameos on the show are fantastic, just because you get to see all these really big people in a light that you normally would never see them. I'm talking Macklemore, Trippie Redd, Young Thug, Justin Bieber, and even one of the Kardashians. Yeah, Dicky actually has a conversation, a very serious conversation with one of the Kardashians, which I didn't even know was possible. In all seriousness, though, I think that he does a really great job at playing a nobody while simultaneously stunting and bringing on all these somebodies. And their presence is enhanced by the fact that they're also playing by the show's rules. So whether they're parodying themselves or not, they're all collectively adding to this ridiculous vision of Hollywood and show business. Eventually, Dicky starts to alienate those closest to him, though, because he's so focused on trying to make it big, even though he's kind of already there. And I thought that was an interesting commentary on the idea of how human beings just always want more. You know, sometimes we just keep on wanting and wanting at the cost of what we already have. In case you haven't picked up on it yet, I really like this show. It's just so different. This isn't the kind of show that comes to mind when you think about a show about a rapper. And that's because it's not really a show about a rapper. That's the front. Just like Atlanta. While Atlanta may feature a rapper in it, at its core, it's about the hustle of doing what you love and trying to make money off of it, right? And also it does really emphasize the strangeness that just consumes the world. Dave, on the other hand, is more about trying to make it big, but bring those closest to you to the top with you. You know, both shows may have hip-hop in them, but they don't necessarily let that define them. Truthfully, my only real issue with the show is the fact that it takes a while to really find its footing. But I kind of find that transformation from kind of weak in the beginning to super strong at the very end really fascinating, because it kind of mirrors Dicky's own transformation throughout the series. How he starts off the very beginning not sure of what he's going to be, and then by the very end he's so sure of what he is. And I haven't seen that much character development in a show, let alone a comedy, in such a long time. That being said, I enjoyed watching the growth, and I didn't mind pushing through some of those slower episodes to get there, but I'm not so sure that everyone will have the patience to do that. For those of you guys who haven't seen the show or are on the fence about watching it, it is worth it. It totally is worth it. It like I said, it is kind of sluggish, you know, episode 2, episode 3, but it is so worth it at the finish line. And I am so excited to see where the show goes in the future. As ridiculous as it sounds, this show about a grown man parading around with the moniker Lil Dicky might just be one of the greatest things I've seen on TV all year. Yes, it has its shortcomings, but it's so different from everything else that's on TV, including Atlanta in some ways, that I think it's totally worth checking out. Dave is the wave, and for that, I'm going to give Dave Season 1 4 stars.
Appreciate that.
Nah, that's some gang shit.
Gang shit.
Guys, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to view this video. It really does mean the world to me. And once again, if you like this video, please make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button as well for more new content like this weekly. Now, if you happen to see the show, if you haven't, if you're a fan of Little Dicky or not, I don't care. Let me know what you think down below in the comment section. If you haven't watched this show already, I highly recommend you do so, obviously. And if you haven't seen the show so far, when you finally do, let me know what you think too. But yeah, that's pretty much all the time that I have for you guys today. I do have some other stuff that I'm working on. A movie coming out next week that I'm very excited to review and share with you guys. So I look forward to doing that. But in the meantime, I have a bunch of other projects that I'm working on, so I should probably just get back to them, right? Until next time, I'm Dempsey Pollard. Take care.
Na, 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 na.